Last night, we issued 5 humanitarian visas to members of the Iranian women's soccer team. Australians have been moved by the plight of these brave women.
Amanda Hodge is the Asia-Pacific correspondent for The Australian, and she's covering the incredible, dramatic, breaking story of the Iranian women's soccer team and their attempt to stay in Australia. Amanda, there's an amazing image that Australians are absorbing today of the Iranian women standing with their hair uncovered with Minister Tony Burke. It's quite a remarkable political statement in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And what others have remarked upon to me, those who have been trying to help these women, is it's the first time they've seen them with their heads held up, not just uncovered, but with their chins up, because they've been so cowed while they've been here in Australia. They're under such very tight surveillance and security that, they carry themselves as people who are under a lot of pressure.
Standing to the right of Tony Burke as we look at the photo is Zara Ganbari. She's the captain of the Iranian women's soccer team, and she was involved in an incident that I think is probably the only thing many Australians knew about this team before they got here. That's in a previous match when her hijab slipped after she scored a goal. She was forced to apologise for that. She was benched, essentially. The team had to apologise as well. It's just part of the kind of oppression that ordinary Iranian women have faced in their home country, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I look at this picture of these women and I feel so deeply for them because, they're smiling. There's obviously relief there, but I mean, what intense anxiety they must also be feeling, for what awaits their families, back in Iran as a sort of collective punishment.
Let's have a look at a couple of the moments that precipitated today's events. So that's the women declining to sing before one of their matches. By the time they took to the field to play the Matildas, they were adopting a different attitude. Amanda, what do we know about what happened between those two videos?
Well, obviously the first match and their refusal to sing was an intensely courageous act of defiance, and it endeared those women to a lot of Australians, even as it imperiled them back home. And in the days between that first match and the Thursday match with the Matildas, broadcasters on state Iranian television, which is the mouthpiece for the regime, made it clear that these women were wartime traitors for not singing the national anthem, and that they ought to be treated in the most severe fashion when they returned. And, in the most severe fashion under the Iranian regime is almost worse than most of us could imagine. Imagine for those women already facing, returning to a war zone, constant aerial bombardments, and on top of that, understanding that when they land, they're going to disappear into the labyrinth of one of the most repressive regimes in the world.
The fact that it's war at the moment in Iran is certainly making things more chaotic, but really the reality for Iranian women, as far as we can tell from here, hasn't changed, has it? I mean, it's only in 2022 that a woman was beaten to death by the morality police for failing to wear her hijab properly. What is the war doing to the situation here? Is it making it more complicated or making it simpler?
Nothing is simple about this war. In fact, after the Women Life Freedom protests in 2022, there was almost like a sort of silent detente between the regime and the women, that there would be a sort of a hijab by choice, settlement of that in most cases they had pulled back from their very restrictive interpretation of regime rules. But that's all over now. Once the economic protests of December and January occurred, and that terrible, brutal, bloody massacre took place by the regime where thousands of people were killed, all bets were off. And now that the war has started, now that the US and Israel have begun aerially targeting all the regime headquarters and defense facilities and senior individuals, the regime is really hammering the population. There is no room for compromise now at all. And in some ways, yes, that has made it very simple for a lot of Iranians. They understand now that the time of compromise, of edging forward bit by bit, very painfully at great cost and sacrifice to the civilian population, is over now, and that, you know, it's taken them 47 years to wrestle back basic freedoms that they should never have lost in the first place. And now they're at a point where they understand that's over, and that this terrible, you know, war on their nation, and that the civilians are paying for, may be the only chance they have to throw off this regime. That's not universal. That's not a universal feeling, but it's clear that is a much more popular understanding and interpretation of what's happening now.
It's amazing how fast things have moved since that Thursday match. Over the weekend, groups of Iranian diaspora members were at the team's hotel in Queensland. There was video that appeared to show one of them making a hand gesture requesting help. And then it seemed really impossible that anything would happen, Amanda. I was expecting these women to get bundled on a plane and disappear back to Iran forever. But then overnight, suddenly it was on. Donald Trump was calling Anthony Albanese. Tony Burke was rushing to Queensland. Let's just slow it down a little bit. First of all, Donald Trump's intervention. I mean, this is a president who has been pretty tough on immigration. He has certainly suspended asylum application rights for people from large parts of the world. The Iranian diaspora in America has been complaining about that. And yet, clearly his heart went out to these women.
Yeah, that was extraordinary, wasn't it? I saw that in the middle of the night and just marvelled at the sort of contradiction there. But yeah, look, it wasn't just Australians that were moved by these women's courage, you know. I mean, it takes enormous guts to do what they did on that Sunday night, March the 1st. And the pressure they've been under, I think most people can understand, you know, that terrible Sophie's choice that they're faced with, you know, protect themselves and put their families in peril, or go back to certain punishment. It's an impossible choice. I mean, Trump's intervention was obviously after the horse had bolted. You know, the government was already on it. The women had already left and were in a safe house. And that came after days and days of escalating pressure, and the tipping point that I understand was when a message came from one of the players' families saying, "You need to stay."
That's the most moving and self-sacrificing act by a family member, isn't it? Because just like in China and in other places around the world, those families at home would know that they would face the repercussions for whatever actions their daughters took here in Australia. What do you know about how things then unfolded inside the team hotel?
It had been, from what I've been told, the pressure had been building pretty fast. And on Sunday, some of the diaspora had managed to talk to a couple of the players. They were so anxious. They were looking behind them the whole time. They were adjusting their hijabs. And what they were saying to the people that were in the hotel trying to help them was, it can't be this easy. It's not going to be this easy. We're frightened. And the reason they were saying that is because the team officials have been in their heads for days telling them, no matter what you hear, no matter what you're told, it won't work. You won't be able to seek asylum. Don't even try it. And then what I understand has been happening is there are two critical figures that live abroad. One is a former Iranian player herself who sought asylum 5 or 6 years ago and lives in Turkey. and is a really safe and trusted source for the players here in Australia. She has been shuttling messages back and forth between Iran and the diaspora, and when she can't get them to the diaspora, directly to the players themselves. And she was the one that was able to reach out to the families and then return those messages to the players. And there's another woman in London who's similarly been helping with intelligence, helping connect the players, and assuring them that there's a plan for them if they do decide to jump.
The Australian Federal Police has had an officer with the team, and that's a very delicate situation for an Australian official, isn't it? I mean, Australia's not actually at war with Iran, although we are, of course, supporting the United States and Israel's combat there. So for an Australian official to be facilitating or encouraging or allowing this application for asylum is very interesting.
Yeah, what a position to be in. It's pretty standard protocol from what I've been told for an AFP officer to be, assigned to visiting teams for whatever they need. But I think it very quickly became clear that officer's job was going to be a dual purpose role, and that I was told that at least on the Monday after those 5 women escaped, that officer was one by one talking to the other players, talking them through what might happen, what their options were, and that assuring them that the government would be there to help them if they chose to seek asylum. So yeah, an immensely difficult role for that AFP officer, who I gather has handled it very well.
Like any visiting team, they've got travelling officials with them. When officials come from Iran, they might be associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which at the moment, according to reports from Iran, seem to be in the ascendant. They're certainly allied with the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khomeini, who himself has been associated with the crackdown on immodest wear. What is the situation now? And this is kind of almost an ethical question too, Amanda. How should Australia treat those officials? Are they committing some sort of crime if they try to stop the women from staying here? Would it be possible for Australia to detain them?
It is a very difficult question, and not just for the reasons that you raised. You have to remember that on Sunday, March the 1st, the coach also did not sing the national anthem. Other team members did not sing the national anthem. So while they're all lumped in together as minders that, have been blocking the players, I think there are people on that accompanying staff team that are probably sympathetic to the players, but even considering affording them asylum is a difficult one for the government. Tony Burke has already said that the players will be given asylum. There's been no mention of team officials. Yes, there are IRGC officials on that team, and yet giving them asylum, it's hard to imagine that ever happening. But imagine what they're in for when they get back, right? They're in for it too, because they failed and they embarrassed the regime at a time of acute vulnerability. This
is the power of a totalitarian regime, isn't it? Everyone becomes complicit. If you're some sort of agent of the state, you are perpetrator and victim, potentially.
Yeah. And look, some of the diaspora and others have alleged that there are several IRGC officers who hold, multiple roles at once. And that may be true, but we have no way of knowing that, So, to be labelled IRGC here in Australia is to essentially block their path to asylum. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. The government is in for a really difficult time if they too seek asylum. As for whether they can, detain them, I don't know about that. But I think they're more likely to be facing the dilemma of whether they allow some of these other accompanying staff to stay. And I think that's going to be the big question.
Iranians are consistently in one of the highest cohorts of people applying for asylum in Australia. They were some of the passengers on people smuggling vessels when they were coming to Australia. People have been trying to escape this regime for years and years, and sympathy for them kind of waxes and wanes. We've already talked about Donald Trump's approach to refugees. But Australians have really embraced this team, haven't they? What does that tell us about kind of the personalisation of a story like this, when you can see a face and feel something about an individual? Does that change the way you think about refugees?
I think yes. I think the fact that they're sports players probably makes them more familiar to Australians. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that the Afghan women's football team was also assisted to seek asylum in Australia. But I think you can't underestimate how Australians feel about, or how they've come to understand, the dilemma that Iranians face. And I think we didn't understand that fully for many years. But the December, January protests and the awful crackdown, the murder of thousands of civilians, it's hard not to feel intense sympathy, for people living under that oppression, facing that sort of daily threat to their lives, that sort of existential threat. And I think that's driven it home. On top of that, you get this courageous team of women coming into the country. It's timing as well as circumstance. And I think it's all come at a time when it's coalesced to a point where Australians do understand, a bit more about Iran. And I think when in talking to some of the diaspora, they mention how frustrating it's been trying to get people to understand in Australia that Iranian people are not their regime. Most Iranians are very much opposed to their regime. In fact, most Iranians are very secular people and have become more secular as their, theocratic regime has become more oppressive. We probably have more in common with Iranians than we could ever imagine. It's a moment for Iranians where everyone can see that they're at an absolute breaking point. What happens next to them is make or break. They'll either, fall back into this oppressive regime that will be worse than ever because there'll be no breaks on the IRGC. It'll be a military regime rather than a theocratic one. And for all the former Ayatollah Khamenei's terrible, weaknesses and faults, he is understood to have put the brakes on, the nuclear kind of threat. He pursued nuclear arms, it is said, as a mutual deterrence without wanting to actually use them. That's what's said of Khamenei, whether that's true or not. But that break is now gone. And you can see from the way that the military, the Iranian military, has started targeting its neighbours, its friends in earnest, in that sort of mosaic style that they talk of, where they disperse authority to, 32 or 34 different commands. There's no breaks on the Iranian military and the IRGC anymore. They'll do whatever they have to do. There are no more red lines. And that's, we really should be fearful of what that means for the region, but for Iranians in particular, the civilians who have no control.
Well, I can't wait to read your story. Amanda Hodge, thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire.